Good afternoon, everyone. Again, I'm Jason Odell, and my website is luminescentphoto.com, and this is Cruising with Your Camera, a presentation that I put together for a unique way of getting to travel the world, have a great vacation, and still make it into a photographically oriented trip. And that's something that sometimes can be challenging for all of us. So I'm going to talk a little about today about the fun that you can have bringing your camera on a cruise and having some fun, making it into a photo adventure rather than just a vacation. So why should you even consider a cruise? I mean, this is a funny question. A bunch of years ago, about 6 years ago now, I got an email out of the blue from my travel advisor, Pat Hand, and I think Pat's with us today. And she asked me if I would be interested in doing a photo workshop on a cruise. And I didn't know what to say. I was a little skeptical about it because I think everybody has sort of a preconceived notion and a lot of ideas about what cruises are or may or may not be. And myself included, I had actually not, I've only been on one cruise prior to that. And I wasn't really sure if it would work, but let me just throw out some ideas for why cruising can be actually really great. It's the ultimate unpack once, go lots of different places kind of trip. And that is, I have to say, very relaxing. So once you're on board and you get on that ship, you get settled into your stateroom and you can travel to a bunch of different locations, multiple locations, enjoy a lot of different places, culture, people, food, and you don't have to worry about changing hotels and ground transportation and all the kind of things that might otherwise make a traditional land vacation a little bit more complicated and hectic, quite frankly. When you're on a cruise, it's elegant. There's great food, and for the most part, with some minor exceptions, it's basically all inclusive. So once you're there, you're good to go. You can add adventures, you can add excursions, you can add alcoholic beverages, but when your fare includes pretty much everything once you get on board, and that's a real nice feeling. You don't have to worry too much about getting nickel and dime for everything. And cruising can give you, if you do it right, a wonderful combination of travel and outdoor photography opportunities. So if you like the kinds of subjects of travel photography, especially, and to some extent outdoor photography, it can be really great if you're a photographer. And then recently, and this is just updating these for the times in which we live, are uncertain times. Cruise ships at this time are one of the few places that require not only proof of vaccination, but also pre-board testing, pre-embarkation testing. So honestly, and I've been on 2 cruises this year already, it's one of the safest things that I've done in terms of a travel experience. Once you're there and you can get there safely, you know that everybody on board with you and on your excursions is going to be in that group of tested and vaccinated. So short of holding yourself up in a Holiday Inn somewhere, it's a really great way to travel the world and see stuff right now. And I should also point out, there's also been a lot of good deals on cruises, so that doesn't hurt either. The cruise industry is certainly trying to get ramped back up after being shut down for almost 2 years. Now, there are some challenges in trying to do photography on a cruise, and I'm going to address some of these challenges today in the kind of photography that we do. And one is just simply finding subjects. It can be a little bit difficult or mentally challenging to find subjects while you're at sea, but I'm going to talk about that. Timing can be tricky, and by that I mean most cruises arrive in a port in the morning, kind of before sunrise or at sunrise, and then they leave sort of at dinner time. So sometimes if you're looking for those hardcore sunrise and sunset shots, you're going to be at sea when it happens, or potentially dining. So you've got to work the timing a little bit, but that's something that you can address through proper planning and looking at different kinds of types of cruises, because not all of them are the giant 3,000 passenger ships. And then lastly, you're going to be in a group setting when you're on a cruise, whether it's just with you and your significant other, your family, or maybe a group that you go with, friends and family. There's this group setting in the excursions, and that can just be a little bit different. You're not on your own quite as often, but again, like I'll mention later, there's ways around it, and you can work through it. So let me talk a little bit about going on a cruise and what do you want to bring on your cruise if you're a photographer. And most of us as photographers, I've been a professional photographer full-time since 2010. We've got everything, right? You've got camera bags and lenses and flashes and tripods and all kinds of stuff. Well, on a cruise, space is a little bit limited. So I try to go light and I try to go small. My tool of choice on a cruise is a small camera. A lot of mirrorless cameras these days are fairly compact. And then I will tend to go towards the all-in-one or nearly all-in-one zoom lens, that one lens that I can put on my camera and pretty much cover a range of subjects. Like I have a 24 to 200 lens that I use, 24 to 120 lens. These are great lenses to have for the everyday all-purpose shooting. You don't have to, you don't want to drop lens caps and change a lot of lenses when you're out on the deck of a cruise ship. I like to bring oftentimes a little fast, wide 35 or 50 millimeter prime lens to use indoors for low light. Sometimes I'll pack like a very super wide lens, but you don't need it. Again, that all-in-one zoom, if you've got those certain range, can often work. I'll bring some stuff like a polarizing filter. Sometimes I'll bring a neutral density filter, and I like to pack a tripod. But again, if you're on a vacation, this might not be feasible. A little travel tripod is often more than enough, and it only comes in handy in certain kinds of shooting situations. So it will really depend on your itinerary. So there's times when you can be out and use a tripod, and there's other itineraries where you're just not going to be out in the evening. You're going to be on the ship and it's going to be moving, and a tripod just doesn't make any sense. And then I like to bring like a little tripod that I can use for my phone. And iPhone is what I have, iPhone 13. And I have this little flexible thing called a Gorilla Pod, which I can clamp my phone to. It works really well. And the reason why is because don't overlook the power of today's cell phones for travel photography. I mean, I have very expensive cameras and lenses and all this heavy gear, but I recently went on a cruise on a transatlantic, and all I brought was my iPhone. And the newer smartphones, they've got multiple lenses. So you've got wide angle and telephoto lenses. Many of them now can shoot in a RAW format, which means you can put your pictures into the same RAW editor like Lightroom that you would use for your regular camera. But the phones do some amazing things. And that's one of these things is called computational photography. So your phone, when you're using your iPhone or your Android phone, a lot of times you can set them up so that just out of the box, they're doing things that you couldn't do with a single image in your regular camera, like HDR, or they'll have portrait mode. You can even do long exposures to a certain extent with your iPhone. It's really cool, and it's something that I like to teach in my travel photography workshops. And phones are also great for doing videos and time lapse, and that's a cool creative technique, and it's a lot easier to just do it on your phone. They have built-in editors. You can even, splice things together with videos, and I'll have some examples of that. And it's just easier than trying to do video with a full-on DSLR or mirrorless camera. So your cell phone is actually a great tool, and something that you could even use as a primary phone on if it's more like a vacation rather than a photo safari. So here's an example. We were leaving Galveston, and I have my phone set up to do a time lapse as we left port, and I had it clamped to the rail of the ship with a little clamp, that tool that I have, and then it just fits in this little tripod type thing, a little socket. So it's kind of neat and very easy and unobtrusive. Here's another photo I captured with my phone in the middle of the North Atlantic on board the Queen Mary 2. Just about a month and a half ago. And I was able to do a quasi long exposure look and get a real creative kind of image from just my phone. Okay, photographers, we like to overpack, but and cameras are expensive. So I like to just mention a few little packing tips before we get into the photography stuff. Never check your camera gear on any kind of airline. Always carry it on with you. So have it in a little backpack or sling bag or something. The only thing I'll ever put in a suitcase is my little travel tripod, because it's not the end of the world. For some reason, if that got lost, I mean, I would be really disappointed, but I could live without it. If you're carrying extra lenses with you, and you're not using them while you're out and about, I just put all that stuff into the safe. Again, another reason to use a small compact camera. You can put extra lenses in your safe if they'll fit. You can, that should say lock bags. Use TSA compliant locks so they don't cut the lock off. Most of them are these days. This is there was a time when the locks got transitioned over, so they'll say they're TSA compliant. So if they needed to get into your luggage to look for something, they could. And just remember that when you're going to embark, when you're checking into your cruise, it's not as stringent as an airport, but it's very similar. You're going to have to go through the metal detectors, the whole kind of thing that you would going to an airport at the cruise terminal. So just be prepared so that you're not full wearing lots of metal and going to set off metal detectors and things like that. Now, what are the secrets to good travel photos? And so here's a list of things that I like to bring to my clients: finding unique subjects, and then presenting popular subjects in a different way so that it's not just the same old postcard that everybody gets. And one of the things I like to impart to my clients on my workshops and my travel groups is to imagine that you're on a photo assignment and your job is to work for the Daily Planet, or you're going to make a coffee table book, and you want to come back with photos that tell a story. So lots of little photos, lots of little details, and think about the kind of photos that you want to have in this hypothetical storybook before you go out and start taking pictures. This is the Mayan temple at Lamanai in Belize, and I photographed it with an infrared camera. So it's a very different look than you would get from a regular camera, especially considering we were there in the middle of the day on our little Mayan adventure cruise back in, I think it was 2017 when we did that. So what should you photograph when you're on a cruise? When I mentioned that finding subjects can be kind of tricky, right? Well, you've got people. They could be just people on your excursions. You could be people on board, the crew, or of course the people you're traveling with. Things that document what life is like on board your ship. There's food, and your phones are great for food photos. Landscapes and wildlife, when you have those opportunities, can also be things you'll see on a cruise. It just depends on the adventure that you're on and what kind of cruise that you're on. So what about shooting at sea? So, everybody worries that, oh my gosh, I'm going to be at sea, and what do we do? Well, one thing you can do is sit by the pool. But if you want to go on and use your camera, you can go shoot at sea. And there's a lot of subjects that you can do while on board the cruise ship itself. So you can do close-ups, and you can do abstracts, and you can take pictures of the deck chairs or whatever, things that you find wandering around the decks. These cruise ships are really huge places to explore. There's tons of stuff to find, and you never know where or when you're going to come across something interesting. So here's the propeller of one of the lifeboats when we were on our cruise ship. Indoors, a lot of times they have really elegant looking rooms. This was a map room library on board one of the Royal Caribbean ships that I went on. Just details, stairs, light and shadow, all done while we were at sea sailing along in the middle of the Gulf of Mexico. Here's one that I captured recently in the middle of the Atlantic on board Queen Mary II on a transatlantic crossing, and I took this with my phone. The restaurants, the bars, the decor, these all make good subjects for telling your story about your trip for when you come home. And of course, food. When you have a great steak at the steakhouse like they had on Queen Mary, you want to remember that steak, so you take a picture of it. You can also do shooting just right from your cabin or on deck of the environment. So here's the Seattle skyline as we were embarking on our way to Alaska. Beautiful day in Seattle, and I was up on the deck as we left port, and you get these sweeping views that you wouldn't be able to get if I was just in Seattle. I mean, the fact that I'm on the ship allowed me to get a photo of the skyline that I wouldn't ordinarily be able to capture. Up in Alaska, we were cruising Glacier Bay, and you never know what you might come across. And I was prepared with some telephoto lenses because I knew there was going to be wildlife on this trip. So this is our Alaska cruise, and there's a bald eagle on a glacier ice floe in the middle of Glacier Bay. You just never know. And I took this right from my cabin, right. I was on the balcony. Go up to some of the decks. This is the port in, I believe this is, I think this was Cancun, and you can just get a nice view and a unique shot of what it's like to look out from the front of the ship while you're docked. And of course, sunrises and sunsets. And I always like to go out onto the stern and get that wake, so you know that here we are traveling on board the, at sea on our cruise. Sunset in the Yucatan. Then, of course, you might be on a cruise. You're probably going to have some kind of shore excursion. Now, these can be things you arrange through the cruise itself, through the cruise line, or you can arrange private excursions tailored to your interests. It's something that myself as a travel advisor is the kind of thing I look into for my clients. So if you want to do something that's not listed with the cruise ship, we can sometimes find that for you. But excursions are a great way to explore cities. And again, how much time you have in any given port just depends on the itinerary of your particular cruise. There's lots of things to photograph when you're on excursions. Again, you got people and culture, architecture, landscapes, wildlife, and close-ups, little detail shots. So let's take a look. We were in Cozumel, and we went to an open air market. This was not a place where you would normally go when you're in Cozumel, but I took my clients on a photo excursion, and we had a really good time doing that. So we took pictures of the people there working, guys going by on bicycles. I used a panning technique to get the blur. So this was with a real camera. Here's the streets of Dubrovnik. You can see the people walking through what it's like wandering through Dubrovnik on a morning. Of course, you can take pictures of the people that you're with on the cruise. So, again, that stern makes a really great place, and I got up on a higher, little bit higher deck and climbed some steps, and we got this nice shot at sunset crossing the Atlantic. You never know where you're going to find shots. So here we're in this little open market, and I looked up, and the colors in the ceilings were really cool. So I took this photo to get the graphic elements. Now, architecture is a no-brainer for certain kinds of cruises, especially if you're going to places like Europe. There's going to be lots and lots of architecture. So here again is Dubrovnik in Croatia, the walled city, and there's a church inside the walls of the old city. All kinds of stuff to explore, lots of stairs and alleyways and cobblestones. It's really cool. The totem poles in Alaska. Here's another stop when we were in Croatia last October. Did a little shooting at twilight. We were able to do that because we stayed in port overnight. And here's the one of the Mayan temples at Uxmal that I recently got back from my Yucatan cruise back in March. Little doorways, architecture. This was also in Croatia, and really just fun stuff to explore wandering around with your camera. And here's Victoria, British Columbia, which is a traditional stop on your way back from Alaska. We had a few hours in the evening to photograph, and this is the Empress Hotel, I believe, in Victoria. Really, really beautiful. This is also in Victoria, and again, we were there in the evening, so we got to do some twilight photography with a tripod. Now, if you're going to a place where there's landscapes, this is one area where cruises can be a little bit tricky because you're never going to be somewhere right at the crack of dawn for sunrise or the traditional sunset shots. So you got to kind of work with it. But there's lots of outdoor photography opportunities on a cruise. So here's Mendenhall Glacier when we had a shore excursion in Juneau on our Alaska cruise a few years ago. You never know who's going to show up while we're just out on the dock. There's a bald eagle right there, just sitting there. We went on a whale watching excursion and we saw the gray whales, and that was really cool. But sometimes you just find interesting little things. So these are rocks, and on the I don't want to say tundra, but it's the, you know, just growing along in Alaska, along the beach there, along the shore, and you just find little details to find to capture subjects. Another thing I like to do on any kind of photo trip is to try to get creative. And that means trying to capture subjects in different ways or use creative techniques to make my photos look different than what you would get with just, you know, the snapshots, the postcards that you can buy in the gift shop. So I'm just going to quickly go through some of my creative techniques, because this is obviously not a time to teach those techniques. That's something that I do with my photo workshops. But there's lots of things you can do. You can change your shooting angle. You can use different kinds of lenses. So those lenses that I talked about that have wide apertures, you can really blur the background. That can be useful. You can do long or long-ish exposures. And like I said, you can even try that with your phone. You saw the picture earlier of when I was panning with the guy on the bicycle in Cozumel. If your itinerary allows it, shoot at twilight. And that could just be even on the deck of your ship, but it's cooler when you're in port in the evening, and just some itineraries allow you to do that. And then there's things you can do when you have your computer, whether that's on board or just back home, and that's creative post-processing, making things black and white or just applying cool effects filters. Other things to add in, stuff that I like to do, sometimes I'll sprinkle in a little video clip or time lapse. And sometimes I'll bring my infrared camera, which is a special kind of camera. It captures light in the infrared spectrum rather than the visible spectrum. And that's how you get those cool white looking palm trees when you're going somewhere tropical. Now, I don't, like I said, I don't always bring that, but it's something that you can consider if you're really serious about it. Keep in mind, you're probably going to go on a cruise and you're going to have either friends, family, or significant other with you. They may or may not want you to disappear for 4 hours, you know, going off and doing photography and leaving them alone, but you never know. So close-up shots are a great way to blur the background and frame your location without having to have everything sharp and focused like might come out with your phone, right? So these conchs are just sitting on a concrete pillar in, this was in Roatan in Honduras, but you can see the palm trees behind there, the ocean. You know you're in a Caribbean setting, even though everything's not in focus. I brought a fisheye lens, shooting at twilight, and this was on board the ship. Now, everyone's usually at this time of night, this early evening, just after sunset. The ship was underway, but most people are eating dinner. So if you had an early or a late seating, or just want to eat on your own, go out on the deck. There's no one there, and you can just get some cool shots of the blue twilight sky. You can even see some stars in this photo, and you get a real neat atmosphere of what it's like on the cruise ship deck after dark. Now, this is one of my favorite techniques to do, using a dark filter like a polarizing filter, or even a couple of stop neutral density filter on my camera, and that's to do something called a swipe. So here we're just out at sea. We're in the middle of the Gulf of Mexico somewhere, and all I did was I used a slightly slower shutter speed and moved my camera. I panned the camera from left to right while shooting the waves, the ocean, and you get these wonderful, pleasant, abstract images that come out when you do this. And you never know what's going to happen, so you just play with it and have fun. I mentioned infrared. So when I've brought an infrared camera, you can get a totally wild and different look. This again was on our trip to, I believe, Roatan in Honduras. And you can see how the foliage comes out completely different. If I just took this with a regular camera and made it black and white, those leaves would be kind of middle gray. But with an infrared camera, they just shine. They reflect back all kinds of energy, and it makes your photos stand out as something completely different. Sometimes I will like to do a little bit of video clips, and sometimes I also like to play around with time lapse. So I'm going to play a quick little video that I actually edited on my iPhone while on board the Queen Mary 2 earlier in May. So I'm going to play this. Okay. So that's a really cool way. You can make a really quick clip of what it's like to I just walked around the entire deck of the Queen Mary, and I got different time lapse, and I spliced them all together just using my phone. Another technique I like to do is set my camera up to capture multiple exposures, to combine and blend images together. So here's a multiple exposure where one, I was turning the camera, and the other was a picture of these lollipops in that market in Cozumel that I mentioned earlier. I like the colors. Okay. Just a little bit on some ideas for post-processing your photos, because this is the stuff that you have to learn the techniques. Again, this is why I teach photo workshops. But this is where you can change the image to reflect your vision rather than what the camera thinks your vision should be in terms of the colors, the contrast, the look. So you can just do just regular old processing, you capture raw files and just make them look normal, or you can get kind of creative. You can give your images a vintage look. Think travel magazines. When you see shots from a city where they all have this particular kind of grungy look or certain kind of urban edge, you can do that with your processing software. It's really easy these days. So these are the kinds of things that I adjust. I won't bore you with those details. This is just, adjusting your images to look like good photographs. So you might take something that comes out of your camera that looks like this, and then you punch it up a little bit so it looks much better. You get those nice God beams, the crepuscular rays of the sun setting through the clouds. Okay, so you just do this to enhance your images. Then there's more creative things. You want to deliver unique images via the tools that you have in your computer. And sometimes it could even be in your iPad or your phone, just using apps, right? So it doesn't have to be hardcore computer processing, but that's how I process my images. So just converting things to black and white. So here we are up in Glacier Bay. This not a bad place to be, very calm, serene, but I wanted this image to convey the cool, the ice and the contrast and the texture of the clouds and the mountains and the ice in the bay itself. So I converted it to monochrome. This photo I showed you earlier was actually a composite of multiple images with different exposures that allowed me to hold back detail in the sky while still capturing a correct exposure for the building. Now, like I said, your phone can do some of this automatically. It's quite impressive what it can do. But if you have your regular camera, it's a technique that you can learn and do in software in post-processing. Sometimes you just want to make your images look old school or vintage, or in this case, old antique black and white, like I'm Indiana Jones visiting the Mayan temple in the 1930s. This is the kind of thing that you can do with effects filters. And then sometimes just for fun, if I have a shot that might have kind of a boring or empty blue sky background or overcast day, I will use images of textures to overlay them and composite them onto my shots, making a shot that I took on my trip, like here's Alaska, into a unique artistic piece of work. And you could easily imagine printing something like this on canvas and having it in your office. So where to go? Let's talk about there's all this fun stuff that's out there. Cruising has never been more accessible. And there's just lots of opportunities for places that you can go. This was shot off our the bow of our yacht in Croatia last October. So what I want to mention at the end of this before I open up to questions is just, when I grew up, cruises were things for old people to do. They were things that were formal and stuffy, and I didn't really think of it as the kind of thing that would be a vacation. But since then, I've come around and seen the light. I've been on several cruises now, and there are so many different cruise brands out there, and each one has their own particular niche. I mean, you've got the family cruises like Disney. You've got the kind of party cruises like, think Carnival, right? And then there's high-end luxury cruises. Then there's the expedition cruises where you're on a boat with a ship's naturalists and expedition, where you might be on a ship with only 200 passengers or even fewer. When I went to Galapagos, we had I think 15 passengers or so. Then there's the grandiose, the transatlantic cruise, like what I did on Queen Mary. That was amazing. And there's lots of sort of slot in between. So you're looking to go to Alaska, for example. You can choose between, say, Princess. You can go on Holland America. You can go on Cunard. Each one is going to give you a different type of experience depending on what you want. You don't want to have a lot of kids around. You go on a different cruise line. You pick something maybe aligned with Holland America or Cunard. So there's lots of cruises for everyone, and because of that, it can get overwhelming. So, one thing I like to say is, this is where having a travel advisor like myself, like Pat, who's with us today, can really, really help you, because we have drawn on our experience of going on some of these different cruise lines and having connections in the industry to know how to match your needs up with the kind of adventure and cruise itinerary and sort of lifestyle, if you will, that really matches your own needs. Because I think the worst thing that could happen to anybody is you go out and you spend a lot of money on something, and then you find out that it's just not the experience that you wanted. I really should have done something different. Now, we have put together at Dancing Moon Travel a couple of adventures for this year where I'll be holding photo workshops as for clients. The first one is going back to Croatia, to the Dalmatian coast, August 26th through September 3rd. We're going to be on a small yacht, I think 15 cabins or something like that total. We've chartered the whole yacht, so we have space on that for a private cruise where you go to the little towns and we stay overnight. So you can bring your tripod, you can do the blue hour and twilight shooting that you wouldn't be able to get on a big ship that leaves port at, say, 5 in the evening. I've also set up a Canada New England fall colors trip for this late September. It's leaving out of Quebec City for 8 nights and returning to Boston. So you come in and it'll be stopping in all the little towns along the way, Halifax, St. John. I've arranged private excursions for my clients to go to places like Peggy's Cove and some of these other places. And then, of course, if that doesn't work for you and you don't want to go on a group, you can always plan your own adventure. I mean, there's lots of opportunities out there. And as I'm sure you've probably heard about, lots of good deals right now. So if you're interested in any of these things, I started Luminescent Travel back in 2020. That was really great timing on my part to start something in March of 2020. But you can contact me and draw on our resources to let me help you put your next cruise or vacation together, or help you with excursions. So I would love to hear from you. And with that, I'm going to open it up to questions, and I hope to hear from you guys soon.